especially human trafficking, sex trafficking, labor violations, environmental crimes. And the last 2-year series I wrote was called The Outlaw Ocean. And it was a look at sort of the watery 2/3 of the planet and the wide variety of concerns out there. I think most people, when they think of bad stuff on the ocean, think of Somali piracy or the BP spill or plastic pollution, all real issues. But the actual spectrum of what's happening out there is much broader. And what we want to do in the New York Times, and then I want to do in the book, and then what I wanted to do, or still want to do at the organization we run, is number one, help people think differently about that frontier as not just an environmental story, a marine story, but also a human story. 56 million people work at sea, and you rarely hear from them or about them. And 80% of what we consume comes by way of the sea. And the large reason that the out of sight, out of mind nature of this topic is it's really expensive and really tough to get out there. But the stories are epic and sort of urgent, and we're all complicit. So I thought, as a journalist, you're looking for virgin snow, and here was a massive patch of virgin snow. I did the series at the Times, and then went back to sea for 2 years with a Brazilian videographer, produced the book, and then went back to the New York Times and thought, I'm just going to step away and create a journalism organization that does a bunch of things distinctly. One is we're going to focus on this realm that doesn't get covered, and we're going to do so differently. We're going to report the stories on the water, get out in the space. Because what journalism was coming out of this space were typically from environmental reporters and reported on land, usually rewrite of academic studies. And we thought, we need to get out into the space and tell the human stories out there in a more vicarious, more visceral way. And then the other thing that we do that's quite distinct is if we really want to tell these stories not for sort of misery porn, but for the sake of actually fixing problems, without becoming advocates, staying as journalists, but nonetheless investigative journalists who expose really severe problems, then we probably need to rethink how journalism is distributed. There's a lot of innovation in how stories are told and presented, and what stories to tackle, but there's very little innovation in how you get it out, how the stories get out. So if you're at the CBC or the New York Times or the New Yorker magazine or the Walrus in Canada, you're probably delivering your content to 5% of the highly literate public. And that's problematic because if you really want to get impact, you need to be thinking about the other 90%, and also you need to be thinking about the global population of non-English consumers. And so young people, non-English, and folks who don't get their news from traditional news sites. So we thought, how do we do that? And that's one of the big things that we do quite differently, which is we take the stories, and I'll tell you a little bit in a second about what those stories tend to be on, but we start with a core story. So last year, we spent a year investigating horrific abuses on migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean to get mostly from Africa to Europe. And we produced a 10,000 word story and an hour-long documentary out of that reporting. That core piece of journalism goes to the traditional legacy outlets. BBC, The Economist, The Guardian, the New Yorker all ran the piece. But rather than stopping there, which is kind of what historically most journalists and investigative units would do, we then said, okay, let's try to figure out a way to get that one story translated into Arabic, so it runs in northern Africa, and French, and Chinese, and Portuguese, and then take the content to venues in all these other countries, and then offer it to them for free. All right, so you take it to El País in Spain, or Le Monde Diplomatique in France, or the CBC, and you say, here's a prize-winning story that took a year to report that reveals some shocking new things. You can have it for free. It costs us $250,000 to produce. You will not own it. Okay, you will not get an exclusive on it. You get maybe a week of exclusivity, and then it goes around the world at large. Well, that's a radical notion in my profession, because copyright and exclusivity are sort of the nature of the game. And it's a game that doesn't benefit the public, it doesn't benefit producers of content, it benefits the outlets. And so we said, let's break that. And the only way you can break it is if you fund your own thing. You gotta bring it for free, or else the editors are like, no, we're not gonna pay you for something and not own it. So we created a nonprofit. We fund our own stories, mostly from philanthropies and individual donors and some readers. We then produce this really high bar content. We then take it out to venues. We translate it into a bunch of languages and we publish it. So the third stage is then we think, how do we get, so my 17-year-old son, now 18, just went to college, smart kid, consumes a lot of news, would not read the New York Times and the New Yorker, no matter how much I harangued him. You know, he gets his news from other places, and he's not unusual. You know, most of his friends were really, really sharp and informed, but they were getting their news, for better and for worse, from other places. So I thought, okay, where can we get at them? Whether they're an 18-year-old in Taiwan or Venezuela or DC, where I'm from. Well, we thought, okay, one huge place that a lot of young people are going and consuming content, it's not news, but they're consuming content, is music. It's Spotify, and it's the 200 other music platforms. So could we think of some clever way to build a ramp from that watering hole to our content? So we thought, okay, well, what if we went out to musicians around the world? She's a celloist, he's an electronic artist, she's a rapper, whatever, in multiple languages, and approached them and said, do you like this recording? Could you read this story confidentially? If it inspires you, if you think it's merited, could you in a month turn something around for us and make something in your style that's kind of emotionally informed by this story? Whatever is the story, murder of migrants, torture of stowaways, dumping of oil, overfishing, illegal whaling, arms dealing at sea, UN sanctions violations in North Korea, all stories we covered, right? All at sea. Whatever the story, would it speak to you? If it does, would you donate your thing, this craft, this thing that you make? In so doing, you allow us to then take your music. We don't let anyone touch our journalism. So we then take the video, we make the video with the journalism so it doesn't get bastardized. And we then couple it with the cello, the electronic, whatever. And now we have something that we can then put up on Spotify. Okay, all of a sudden, you have a piece that might have gotten 2 million views, and now there's a song with interesting video content on a platform that's not a traditional news platform that suddenly is accessing my 18-year-old son. And he's going, wait, why is J. Cole rapping about like fishing in Ghana? I like the rapper J. Cole, or I like Drake, since it's in Canada. And so, but what is this about? Why is this song called that? What's this footage discussing? And then they get curious. And the percentage is 1 of every 10 hops over. We watch the IP traffic from Spotify or Amazon Play or what have you over to the website. And then we watch their IP, their IP address, and we see how long they sit. When you're dealing with, right now, upwards of 60 million listeners to the music we've created, 1/10 of it's a huge number, right? So, and these are it's gimmicky, guilty as charged, but these are the gimmicks that really allow for social change. We don't degrade the value of the journalism, but we build clever on-ramps from other non-news platforms. So you take that model and you think, okay, that worked really well, a lot of generosity among artists, a lot of passion, wanting to bring their craft to things that concern them. So let's work together with them. So let's move from there to video games. Let's move from there to mural artists. Let's move from there to stop motion animators. These are all storytellers in their own form who, if you approach them respectfully and say, hey look, if this doesn't speak to you, then fine. If it does, could you donate something in that form and allow us access to your platform and your audience? So that's the third stage of what we do. We try to do, incredible journalism that then we also try to distribute in a really different sort of way to get at a lot more people. And all I would say to close is sort of going back to the stories that we cover are about this sort of forgotten frontier, which is beautiful, awe-inspiring, and dystopian. and pretty shocking. We are all dependent on it. So 50% of the air we breathe, 80% of the commerce we partake in some places in the world, 70% of the protein we consume, all tied to the oceans. 90% of the world's fish stocks have collapsed. The oceans are running out of marine life. More oil is intentionally dumped into the ocean than is spilled every 3 years than the Exxon Valdez and the BP spill combined. These are not stories you're hearing typically. And they affect us all because, again, if you think of the planet as sort of a vital organ, it is the temperature stabilizer, the oceans, the lungs, the circulatory system of our commerce. It is an extremely important space, and yet journalistically, it's maybe 2% of coverage. So for all those reasons, we feel like we've tapped into a really important story and space and demographic. But we, and again, this is going to sound pitchy, but we do depend on the generosity in lots of different forms, from artists and also from donors and from readers to keep us afloat. Because the only way we can get, like the last big investigation out of Libya, 40 million readers is by breaking the exclusivity and copyright model, and that depends on a free distribution. You can't go to, news outlets in Algeria and Taiwan and try to get them to run something and pay for it. You have to offer to them for free, and that's why these guys invited me to come talk before you. So I think I was supposed to stop there.
No,
and then
I mean, we'd probably go all night. I could listen to you all night. I'm going to open it up to questions because I want to honor the moment, and I don't know how it doesn't break you. I don't know how you witness human trafficking and people with missing limbs and that, or just trying to stay alive, and it doesn't break you. I don't know how you do it, because I listen to you talk and it hurts. So where do you find the will to continue to scream into this hurricane of evidence and no one's listening? Like, how do you keep going?
So a couple things. One, there's an amazing amount of beauty and heroism out there. I'm an investigative reporter, so I am looking for things that are broken so I can try to shine light on them. But that's not to say that that's all that's out there. And what keeps me going is all the sort of unsung heroes that are out there doing amazing work, fighting a similar fight, point one. And sometimes those heroes are the very people I'm covering. 2 years ago, did a story about trafficked Cambodian deckhands. The humor, the sense of camaraderie, the sort of ingenuity, the will to survive, just their overall outlook on life was just amazing. And I lived on board with those guys for a while. So in the very victims, there's reassurance at all that's good about us creatures. And then there's also a lot of wins, through the journalism and outside the journalism, there's a lot of progress when it comes to all these crimes, and that inspires me. So I think that's what keeps me going, those two things.
Beautiful. Is there any questions for Ian? And again, yeah, Darren? Boris?
So if there's one thing that a human being can do, I know, you know what's coming, right?
Yeah.
I got the risotto.
Right. Where Darren is going.
Hold on. You want to get the question out?
No, we shouldn't even allow him.
Okay, no, allowed.
Darren wants to ask if there's one thing that people can do to try to, battle these issues. What is it? And the answer Darren wants me to give, which I think is true, but not exclusive.
Sorry, go ahead.
What Darren is stop eating meat. All right. So my personal stance on that issue is yeah, the science is pretty clear when it comes to climate change and the things that average folk can do, you know, and have an impact on the fate of the planet. Like, that's high up there, 1, 2, you know, so, and I don't eat meat, but I don't tend to push that perspective because the world is complicated and people have to decide.
It's
what
polarizing.
Yeah.
It's polarizing.
Well, it's also just, anyway, so
Yeah.
it doesn't, but yes, I think that it's clear that people's purchasing decisions and their consumption decisions play a big role in how they can affect climate change. But at the same time, I would say a huge part of what I focus on is the intersection of human issues and environmental issues. And climate change is extremely important, but there also are other huge, very human issues that don't have to do with climate change. So murder with impunity and torture with stowaways and sea slavery are not climate change issues. They have a climate change connection. The reason they're getting worse is partially climate change connected. But I just think that there are lots of other problems that also aren't solved by veganism. But I hope that's not too qualified an answer
Okay.
for your taste. Yeah. So someone else asked. Yeah.
Yeah, no, not sufficient answer. So, for me, my family manufactured the most popular sailboat in the world. I did the Olympics in sailing. I did the America's Cup in sailing and won it. The water has afforded me a massive opportunity in life. I don't know any of these stories. I was just in Guadeloupe on a beach. You know, the water's coming in, and so when we ask that question, I think the interesting piece is we all have wherewithal. Every one of us has a network and some substance. And so when we answer it, it's how can we help? You know, and it's admirable to listen to tonight. There's a lot of depth that we're not hearing about. But when Darren brings it up, it would be interesting for the Joe public, the layman, because we all have to survive vis-a-vis this water. And so it'd be interesting to find out what are the vehicles, because we can find vehicles for so many things, you know, for our kids, for our local stuff. But it'd be really interesting for someone to champion the cause to give us pathway. Listen, I know more about the water than anybody else in here, and I have no clue, except him.
No.
I stand corrected, but you know what I mean? The pathway is such an essential piece.
I think the point I would make is that increasingly we all live in a world where we're separated from the realities of how we get stuff, right? And I think that's we get stuff cheap and fast from far away, and that's globalization. And it's not all bad, but there are real worries about whether it's iPhones or Nike shoes or shrimp. You know, it's all part of an increasingly decentralized system. And I think it's beholden to us, especially us of means, to resist the comfort that's afforded by that divorce. And functions like this help remind us, wait, I could get further and further away from these dark realities. I have the means to be able to insulate myself further and further. But I think ethically, you probably want to resist that for your kids, etc. So while veganism, I think, is one way, we all are, the other thing I would say is, like, when people ask me, like, okay, so you write this book and it's got this huge taxonomy of lots of different bad things, what do I do about it?
Yeah.
First I say, don't get demoralized by thinking about the war. Like, it's too big and too ongoing and too demoralizing, so don't think about that. Just think about it as a bunch of different battles. Choose which battle speaks to you, whether it's plastic pollution or sea slavery or whatever, lots of even things out, domestic violence. Choose your issue, and then also bring down your own expectations, but think of yourself variably. So each of us is a consumer, we buy stuff. We're a donor, we give money. We're a voter, we're a taxpayer, we're an interlocutor. We've got partners and kids, and we talk to people. Okay, so we all wear lots of different hats. And if you just think of yourself, okay, I wear 6 hats, and in each of these roles, I can do something small on my one issue. Okay, that's a manageable thing. We've got kids to get to school and, you know, dinner to prepare. But like if you bring it down to size and think of it that way, so like, okay, I want to support this organization, and not me, I'm not selling this stuff, but this is my cause, I like the work they do, this issue really worries me, I'm going to spend 20 minutes reading a little bit about, can I buy something and not something else that might lessen my check. So just like bring it down to size on your issue, whatever it is. I think that's the best way to handle all the topics.
You.
That's really well said. Was there any other questions? Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say that I admire what you're doing and your courage to come out and change your life to, you know, do what you're doing. I had no clue about all this. And why isn't more of the world like trying to help in these situations? Like, you know, I don't know.
Follow the dollar.
I know there's
The
gotta be more
short
humanity than just a dollar.
No, but
There's
okay.
gotta be more.
And I think
don't get it.
I think you cover this well in the book, because a lot of times we are following the dollar. Like why, and I didn't know this. I used to run restaurants actually in Toronto, and I remember sea bass the first time it came on our menu. Sea bass. I'm like, I'd never heard of it. Tasted great. It was amazing. Put a bit of beurre blanc on it. Unbelievable. Sold hundreds of them. And then in his book, he talks about it was a marketing ploy. What's the real name?
Patagonian toothfish.
Okay? Nasty looking fish. Google it. It's hideous. No one's buying that based on looks. But, and they're hard to fish. Again, if you haven't read the book, it's in the Arctic Ocean, and what happens, and this is the real lawless part of it, is there are poachers, and they trawl. And they literally rape the ocean to bring these in for millions. It's $1 billion business. And there's people out there trying to fight this. And this is where he, hearing about the longest nautical chase in history, 110 days, decides, I want to be on that boat. So he literally jumps out of his chair, starts making phone calls, calls the guys chasing the pirates or the poachers, says, I want to be on the boat. They're like, dude, you're not getting on that boat. He's like, I'm getting on that boat. They're like, dude, you're not getting on the boat. He's like, I'm getting on the boat. Tell me where to meet the boat. And he gets on the boat. And there's stories I'm going to omit. But then witnesses this and just the effort to do that. At the end of the chase, you know what they do? They sink the goddamn boat. They'd rather destroy the evidence and think they can get away with it than be caught. Now they did get caught because the guys chasing them, they did their homework and they had proof the whole way through. And then that's the story he tells. That's chapter 1. So, talking about what can we do, we're gonna put some firepower into your war chest. I know it's not a lot. But Corporate Connections, in the name of this chapter of Corporate Connections Toronto 1, we're doing a 10,000 donation to the, and I'm going to say it right, the Outlaw Ocean Project. I went with the smaller one so you could still like roll back to DC with it.
Get on the plane.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
But thank you for coming and yeah. So, and again, if you're interested in doing something about this and helping Ian get this message out, we will make it available to you, a link that you can go, just put your credit card. He's made it very painless to give away your money. But it is, unless you're willing to go jump on a boat and witness, and you're willing to go and chase down poachers and make a difference, help him do it. Help him bring it out there. So you can think